Hi guys, it's Joe. Welcome back to the channel. If you haven't already, give us a like and a subscribe and a comment in the section down below. In the next series of 3 videos, I'm going to show you how I treat back pain within the clinic. So initially I'm going to go through stabilisation of the paraspinal muscles of the back, then I'm going to go through balance and neuromuscular control, and also I'm going to go through pelvic floor dysfunction and strength of the core. So there's an ever-growing body of evidence to suggest that back pain and the muscles around the spine are very highly correlated. So if you look at the muscles around the spine, you've got the large muscles like the lat dorsi, the erector spinae and the QL. As soon as you strip back those muscles, you've then got the multifidi that runs all the way along the spine, and it's a deep core muscle and the sole purpose is to protect the spine. Then if you go back a layer, you've got the rotator muscles that attach between the joints. The purpose of those 2 muscles is to protect the spine within the first 30 degrees of spinal neutral. If there's a weakness there, then the spine's very vulnerable to being pulled or damaged, and that's generally where people tend to pull their back. So if they're reaching forward to open a cupboard or to turn on the kettle, it's that initial small movement that generally tends to pull the back. And it's vulnerable because the larger muscles work outside of the 30 degrees of motion. So within spinal neutral, generally there's very little muscular control if the paraspinal muscles aren't nice and strong. In a meta-analysis by Cooley in 2018, he suggests that there's a highly significant relationship between the weakness of the paraspinal muscles and back pain. So generally the muscles are quite weak and they haven't got a large density. It's a high predictor for back pain. So in this video, I'm going to show you exactly how I isolate those muscles in order to strengthen them up and protect your spine within that first 30 degrees of movement. So let's get started. Initially you need a resistance band, and it's important that you get one of the right resistance, so I'm going to link this one in the description below. Next up we've got a stick. The whole idea of using a stick is it just gives your back a bit of feedback to make sure it's nice and straight. Next up is the Airex Pad, so you want a bit of foam that's really nice and squidgy. The Airex Pad has got 3 different layers of foam, so it really helps to scramble the signal between your feet and the floor. First of all, we're going to start off in a tandem stance, so one foot directly behind the other, toe to heel. The whole idea of this is it puts you in an unstable position, so really forces the smaller stabilising muscles of the spine to work in order to stabilise you. You can see on my right hand side I'm nice and stable and I'm not really wobbling. If you then compare it to the left hand side, you can see that there's a significant amount of wobble, and that's exactly what we're looking for. So there's a neuromuscular deficit between the brain and the spinal stabilising muscles. So you can see that when I'm looking left to right and rotating, as I'm wobbling, my spine's really vulnerable within those degrees of movement. So in order to strengthen it, you're going to keep the hips really nice and stable and then rotate the upper body left to right. You find that when you do this along the side of your core, you're going to feel a really strong contraction. So it's working the obliques as well as the smaller spinal stabilising muscles, so the multifidi and the rotatory muscles in between the spine. I'd repeat left to right as 1 repetition and then repeat this through 8 to 10 times on either side. To make this exercise significantly harder, you just want to tuck your pelvis under. This creates a good amount of gap between the joints and the back, so you're really relying on the stabilising muscles to help support you. Next, using the Airex Pad. So 70% of your balance is a result of the mechanoreceptors between the joints. Standing on that Airex Pad really scrambles the signal, and as you've got a large amount of joints within the feet, you're then relying more so on the joints in the spine in order to stabilise you. With each of the exercises that I'm going to perform, if you use an Airex Pad, then it's going to make it significantly harder. So we finally got around to using the band. You want to pull it apart. This helps to wipe out the external obliques by keeping them occupied. Then you want to keep the hips as stable as possible and rotate to the right and then left. Repeat through 8 to 10 times on either side. And you'll find that this is significantly harder than the initial rotation that we were doing, as you've got less muscle activation throughout this range. The really good thing about this exercise is that you're working within spinal neutral, or the first 30 degrees of spinal rotation. This means that the spinal stabilising muscles again are really activating and doesn't really give the larger muscles much of a chance to take over the movement. So we're going to repeat the exact same on the Airex Pad. So pulling the band apart, rotating left to right, and you can see that I'm wobbling a lot more than I was when I was just on the floor. And once you're nice and stable on the previous exercise, use the Airex Pad to advance it. You'll find that you're ready to progress on the previous exercise once you haven't got any wobble or lack of balance. So now moving on to the stick, you don't want it to part from your backside, so you want to keep the spine really nice and straight. This again stops the larger muscles from taking over and keeps the spine in neutral throughout the whole movement. And you'll find to not topple forwards, you're really having to engage your core muscles to keep everything nice and tight. That's the whole purpose of the exercise. You want to bend forward first of all, then over towards the right hand side and then the left hand side. That's 1 repetition, then you want to repeat through for 8 to 10 reps. And once you're really nice and stable with this exercise, you want to jump on the Airex Pad, again in the Tandem Stance, and repeat this exercise through. You want to really engage the core, try and keep the hips as still as you can and rotate the upper body. You'll find that once you're really nice and stable with this exercise and you're not wobbling, that you'll be ready to progress on to larger exercises.